Presentation by Kate Lemos McHale, Director of Research at the Landmarks Preservation Commission.
On? Oh, good. Good afternoon, Chair Lago and Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to present 4 historic districts that were designated in Sunset Park on June 18th this summer. Let's see. Go. This 1880 map shows the area of Sunset Park that we studied within the broader context of Brooklyn and its waterfront. The neighborhood's historical development was closely connected to its working waterfront, with its architecture characterized by row houses built in the late 19th and early 20th century to house port workers as well as professionals who commuted into downtown Brooklyn and Manhattan. The neighborhood features striking topography located on a hill sloping up to the highest point in Brooklyn. In such a large study area, which spanned from 40th to 60th Streets and between 4th Avenue and 7th Avenue, we developed a framework for identifying historic district boundaries that should include intact rows of buildings that exemplify Sunset Park's historical and architectural development and incorporate blocks with the strongest character, highest integrity, and cohesiveness that together create a distinct sense of place. And this study originated from requests from the community for several non-contiguous historic districts throughout the area of Sunset Park. We broadened this, the study area really to include what you see here on the map, to put their requests within the context of the overall neighborhood and to really study everything to determine which areas were the strongest for historic district designation. And the 4 that we selected are shown here. They contain the most cohesive and intact concentrations of high-quality architecture in Sunset Park, representing its primary periods of development. These 4 areas are where coherent historic streetscapes continue across several blocks to create a strong sense of place. And 50th Street, which is a single block, consists of 2 complete rows of brownstones designed by just 2 architects and built at the same time, and is really one of the strongest blocks in the neighborhood. We worked closely with the community, in particular the Sunset Park's Landmarks Committee, and with the council member, Carlos Menchaca. We did have broad support for these. We received 26 people spoke in favor at our public hearing, and we also received 42 written submissions in favor of all 4 districts. We did receive some opposition from property owners, really just about 10 individuals concerned about their development rights. My presentation today will give you a brief historical and neighborhood overview and just describe our study, and then get into each district very briefly as well. So research staff studied the area, as I said, a large area very carefully, and documented construction dates, building typologies, architectural character, and styles. Where are we going? There we go. Historically, Sunset Park was largely farmland until the 1890s, when it was transformed by new transportation links and the industrial development of the waterfront, in particular Bush Terminal. This 1898 map shows that most of the development by this time is closer to the industrial port in the western portion of the neighborhood, shown at the top of the map. And just a note on the orientation of our maps, to fit in the horizontal layout of our slides, are rotated, so north is shown always actually more to the right side of the slide. I do blame my roots being from Maine, so I'm very comfortable with down east. So formerly considered part of Bay Ridge, the neighborhood eventually took its name from the park located between 41st and 44th Streets, between 5th and 7th Avenues. Construction began on Sunset Park itself in the 1890s and was completed in 1911. The extension of the first elevated railway along 3rd Avenue in 1893 and the announcement of the planned 4th Avenue subway in 1905 spurred rapid residential development of the Sunset Park neighborhood, which was essentially completed by the time of World War I. Early owners and residents of Sunset Park included German, Irish, Italian, Danish, Finnish, and Swedish immigrants, and this immigrant history and character has continued to this day. As seen in this 1903 map and 1907 advertisement, long, consistent rows of houses were developed throughout the neighborhood around the turn of the century, many constructed speculatively as two-family houses, which enabled their owners to earn extra income by taking in renters. And a lot of local developers, builders, and Brooklyn architects were involved in developing the neighborhood. Sunset Park rapidly developed in a short time frame, and within this development history, we find three major phases. Its late 19th century development, early 20th century development, and later development between 1910 and World War I. Row houses built in the 1890s typically feature brownstone or brick facades, as you can see in the image on the left on 58th Street. Between 1901 and 1909, two-family row houses with more ornate elements were constructed throughout the neighborhood, and some examples are shown in the center. And after 1910, larger apartment buildings start to appear in the neighborhood, flats and tenements, such as one shown on the right, which is on 44th Street and 6th Avenue. This map is of building dates, with the darkest blue being the 1890s construction, the medium blue being turn of the century, and the lighter blue being that 1910 to World War I period. And it really shows the general distribution of these primary periods of development throughout the neighborhood. The older buildings tend to be closer to 4th Avenue, and that was closer to the waterfront, and then development started to grow east through the neighborhood. So the Sunset Park South Historic District and the 50th Street really have strong collections of the primarily late 19th century, the earliest period of development. Central Sunset Park has primarily turn of the century architecture in very strong and consistent rows. And Sunset Park North has some turn of the century and some excellent examples of the 1910 era apartment buildings. And the streets that we incorporated within these really are very strong. As you can see, these consistent rows, very intact and very characteristic of each of these periods of development. Outside of these districts, the context of the neighborhood is much less consistent. We find commercial avenues along 4th and 5th Avenues and also 7th. And then in the mid-block, you do find a lot of examples of refacing and alterations and new construction that's starting to be out of scale with the rest of the row houses. So these really are those areas where the historic character remains very much intact, and you have that strong sense of place. So I will just take you through each one of those districts now. Sunset Park South consists of approximately 285 buildings. It's located between 54th Street and 59th Street, between 4th and 5th Avenues. It contains some of the area's oldest buildings in intact rows, capturing the early development of Sunset Park and its residential character. And as you can see in this map, this district is mostly constructed in the 1890s, which is shown in dark blue on the map. Its architectural row house typologies we looked at, the purple hues are stone-fronted houses, the brick-fronted houses are shown in pink hues, and those different colors then break down by bay shape. So we were really looking at what this shows is just a strong consistency of these rows of a particular type of building. So that translates into really interesting and beautiful streetscapes. And in terms of integrity, the level of intactness of these buildings, again, very strong. The dark green is intact. Minor alterations are shown in yellow, and major alterations are shown in red, and there's very few altered buildings. We did not include a small section of 57th Street, you can see there in the map, because of a concentration of very altered buildings and also larger buildings of a different typology there. But these are some images in Sunset Park South Historic District of the beautiful rows. And as you can see, then the rhythm of these very similar bay shapes down the row is quite picturesque. There is a lot of brownstone here from the 1890s row houses, a lot of intricate carving and beautiful detail that's still very intact. Sunset Park 50th Street contains 2 rows of 25 houses framing 50th Street between 4th and 5th Avenues. Constructed between 1897 and 1903, as Sunset Park was developing into a working and middle-class community, this section of 50th Street was one of the neighborhood's finest historic blocks, notable for its cohesive rows of remarkably well-preserved brownstone-fronted houses representing the turn-of-the-century architectural development of Sunset Park. And here again, we see that the whole block was built in the 1890s, and it's all built with brownstone, stone-fronted buildings, typically of the same bay shape, and all very intact. And here you see some images of that block. And again, these are very interesting. They combine Renaissance revival and Romanesque revival. And so you have the very angular classical forms of the Renaissance revival with the more sort of floral and curvilinear medieval carvings that you start to see in the Romanesque. So these are really standouts. And Central Sunset Park consists of approximately 148 buildings located on 47th and 48th Streets between 5th and 6th Avenues, along both sides of 6th Avenue between 47th and 49th Street. And these were constructed between 1897 and 1906, so this really captures that turn of the century, first decade of the 20th century development history of the neighborhood. And here's an area where we did have some historic character and consistency along an avenue too, so we were able to incorporate that to extend the mid-block character. And as you can see here, primarily first decade of the 20th century, row houses, mostly brownstone, with some brick, and again, very high integrity. And here are some examples of the architecture in this district. We see some variety in terms of flat-fronted and bow-fronted, but really it's just very, it's a wonderful sense of place you get there. And finally, Sunset Park North is 2 blocks of buildings, 56 along the south side of 44th Street between 5th and 7th Avenues along Sunset Park. And these 2 well-preserved blocks overlook the park, are notable for their cohesive rows of limestone and brick-fronted houses and apartment houses, all representing the neighborhood's architectural development following the turn of the 20th century. And as you can see, again, these are very consistent rows, and both architecturally and in terms of how intact the buildings are. These are the examples of photos of each type of building that exists in this district. They have a special character along the park. They include a unique row of limestone-fronted houses that's unique to the district, to the neighborhood, and one of the neighborhood's most intact and consistent blocks of brick flat-fronted row houses. A lot of blocks of this building type do exist in the neighborhood. It's a little bit more modest than the more sort of high-style brownstone buildings that you see, but we felt that these really do capture that development history, the working class history of the neighborhood, and this row, A, has a special character along the park, and B, is really the most intact row of this building type. And so these are just some more images. The apartment buildings were built in 1913. We did find that these became Finnish co-ops, which is something that's also an interesting story in Sunset Park. And then you see the beautiful row of limestone fronted houses along the park. And this really highlights also the topography in the area. And this is the very intact row, all built in 1903 and all designed by the same architect and developer, which really is characteristic of the neighborhood as well. With their geographical distribution throughout the neighborhood, the 4 historic districts capture the primary periods of development and resulting range of residential building typologies in Sunset Park. Together, they tell the story of Sunset Park's development history and capture its most significant architecture and streetscapes. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions? Commissioner Deleuze.
Thanks for the presentation. I know the community well, and I know that the local local residents who put forward this proposal, can you maybe talk a little bit more about some of the areas that were originally included in their proposal that, I think you've presented why they were probably not included in this. In particular, I'm assuming the alterations piece of it, or perhaps not having cohesive blocks and things like that. That would be helpful to understand. And I'm just wondering, obviously this is a neighborhood with a lot of pressure, a lot of transition going on, a lot of gentrification pressures. Is it typical as part of the process for Landmarks et al. To look at, in this case, there's mostly owner-occupied buildings, but to look at the race and socioeconomic status of folks that are owning the properties, and then is there any process of looking back on how landmarking may contribute to any changes that happen in the future, in addition to preserving the property, but how it might contribute to any other changes demographically in the community?
Sure. Well, I'll start with the first part, which is the requests were kind of all around the neighborhood in very small kind of groupings. These actually do incorporate areas that were requested. But there were some areas, I don't know if I can point up here. No.
Point up there.
But I can point here. Okay. So there were some areas here and also off the map, a short area here. They tended to be not complete blocks, or, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong place. They were really more over here, 4th Avenue and 5th Avenue, but there were a couple over here. And what we really tried to do, it's not typical to do non-contiguous historic districts. We have before, but we really wanted to have a strong framework for doing that. And that was, as I explained, to really capture these strongest blocks that that tell the story of the development of the neighborhood in the best way. So while there are a few other blocks that are also consistent, that character was captured here in a larger, that feels like a district. So it's a distinct section that you kind of sense that you're in a historic district rather than one block here or one block there. This 50th Street, we did include because of the strong consistency really stood out there beyond any other block in terms of each row, but designed by one architect, and they were all built at the same time, and it was very, very strong there. There was another block on 43rd Street that people were hopeful we would do, and again, the character is not far off from here. But again, it's just one block, and the 50th Street really was a standout above that. So I would say this was the framework for doing this. It doesn't mean that we're never going to go back to Sunset Park. So I think we were very grateful and positive about doing this now, and this was the way that really worked to do that here. And then in terms of demographics, we did look at that, and that I think that's part of what makes this neighborhood so very interesting. And we had a lot of interesting community meetings. We had interesting, it was just like the public hearing just had such a feeling to it. But we did look into that to understand, and designation, there's only so much that can sort of control or lend to in terms of that aspect, but I think, the hope would be that that character of the neighborhood continues, and that working with Landmark staff who really understand, property owners and what they deal with here, even if it's owner occupied or not, and the challenges of that are very, work very well with property owners. And so I think the hope definitely is not to push out anybody from this neighborhood, but to make it very workable.
Other comments? Commissioner Levin.
Yeah, I have a question about the pace of change that's happening to older buildings in the neighborhood. You mentioned, some of the areas that have not been included had seen some alterations with, that made them not so appealing from a landmarks
Right,
perspective.
yeah.
Is that happening? Has that been happening consistently over a period of time, or are we seeing it accelerate?
I think it has probably started to accelerate, but there are alterations that have been there for a long time. A lot of the earlier construction was wood frame, and basically all of that is recited and very altered. And those are probably the buildings that are getting demolished and rebuilt because they're the less solid buildings. But yeah, you do see, and the concern for that is really what spurred a lot of people are really concerned about that happening. So.
Others? Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And particularly, thank you for putting it in a social and a socioeconomic context. That was helpful.
Great, thanks.
Okay. We will now begin the regular agenda of the New York City Planning Commission review session for Monday, July 29th, 2019. The time is 1:24 and a quorum is present. The first four items on the agenda, we're going to call them together. They are pre-hearing review for the historic district designations in Brooklyn Community District 7. Amy Jin will present.
An application by the Landmarks Preservation Commission to designate 4 areas of the Sunset Park neighborhood as historic districts.
Oh, could you pull this close to you?
sorry.
There you go.
As historic districts in Community District 7, Brooklyn. The 4 historic districts are as follows. Sunset Park North includes 54 buildings along 44th Street between 5th and 7th Avenues. Central Sunset Park includes approximately 140 buildings on 47th and 48th Streets between 5th and 6th Avenues, and on 6th Avenue between 47th and 49th Streets. Sunset Park 50th Street includes 50 buildings along 50th Street between 4th and 5th Avenues, and Sunset Park South includes approximately 280 buildings located between 4th and 5th Avenues and 54th and 59th Streets. The historic districts and surrounding areas are predominantly residential, interspersed with commercial, public facilities, and institutional uses along the avenues. Sunset Park North is mapped R6B on the mid-blocks of 44th Street and R6A along 6th Avenue. Central Sunset Park is mapped R6B on the mid-blocks of 47th and 48th Streets and R6A along 6th Avenue. Sunset Park 50th Street is mapped R6B. Sunset Park South is mapped R6A and R6B with C24 commercial overlays along 4th and 5th Avenues and C43A mapped along a portion of 5th Avenue. R6A and R6B are contextual districts which regulate the height and bulk of new buildings to produce buildings that are consistent with existing neighborhood character. C24 commercial overlays are typically mapped with residential districts to accommodate local retail services. C43A is a contextual commercial district mapped in denser regional commercial centers. Its residential equivalent district is R6A. These blocks were rezoned as a part of the Sunset Park rezoning in 2009. As you can see from this aerial, the area is primarily medium density. This is Sunset Park North. As you can see, Sunset Park is directly to the north of the historic district. This is Central Sunset Park. The surrounding area contains primarily medium density residential buildings with mixed use buildings along the avenue. This is Sunset Park 50th Street, which is comprised of only residential buildings. This is Sunset Park South. Again, the area is primarily residential with commercial, public facility, and institutional uses along 4th and 5th Avenues. These historic districts are significant for their collection of well-preserved and architecturally cohesive row homes. The districts are comprised almost entirely of 2- and 3-story row homes. The historic district represents Sunset Park's transformation from undeveloped farmland into a working and middle-class community at the turn of the 20th century. In 1916, members of this community formed the first nonprofit housing cooperative in the country, and by 1922, 20 buildings were part of this affordable housing cooperative, including the flats houses in Sunset Park North, which were converted to co-ops between 1920 and 1922. Although Sunset Park was negatively impacted by redlining, suburbanization, and the decline of waterfront industry following World War II, the Landmarks Preservation Commission's report states that new residents revitalized the community as it evolved from majority white to majority Latino and Asian. Department of City Planning staff is unaware of any conflict with the zoning resolution, projected public improvements, or any plans for development, growth, improvement, or renewal in the area involved. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, then we'll have all 4 of these on the schedule for a public hearing on Wednesday.
The 5th item on the agenda, page 74, is a pre-hearing review of a UDAP designation project approval and disposition of city-owned property in Brooklyn Community District 16. Our presenter is Anthony Grande.
Good afternoon. This is an application by the Department of Housing Preservation and Development for a UDAP and disposition to facilitate the development of 3 new 100% affordable buildings with a total of 41 units. The project area is located in 2 clusters in the Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn, Community District 16. The project area consists of 3 separate development sites in 2 clusters in the Brownsville neighborhood. In the southern portion, we have the Osborne Street development site and the New Lots Avenue development site. These are within about a block of each other, and about 1 mile to the north is the Liberty Avenue development site. All 3 sites are city-owned vacant lots, which HPD proposes for new development pursuant to the existing zoning. All 3 of these developments would range in affordability from 30 to 80% AMI. Looking first at the 2 sites to the south, the surrounding area is primarily residential with some local retail and institutional uses. The area is well served by transit. The New Lots Avenue station on the L train is about 4 blocks east of the New Lots Avenue site. Both sites are within an existing R6 zoning district, which is a medium density residential district. The New Lots Avenue site also contains a C23 commercial overlay, which allows for neighborhood retail and services, typically on the ground floor of mixed-use buildings. The surrounding area has a mixed built context. 2- and 3-story row house style buildings are common in the area. Also, directly between the 2 project areas is the Plaza Residences, which is a 385 unit apartment complex of 6-story buildings on a large lot. Commercial uses are generally local serving retail, and services are found typically within ground floors of mixed-use buildings, in some cases in standalone 1-story commercial buildings. This is the New Lots Avenue development site from the street level. It's an approximately 5,700 square foot interior lot with a single frontage on New Lots Avenue. The proposed New Lots Avenue developments would be a 6-story mixed-use building with an approximately 2,000 square foot ground floor commercial space and a total of 16 affordable units and 1 superintendent's unit. The building would rise to a height of 65 feet. The building would have a 30-foot rear yard, which would be a recreation space containing an active play area and seating area for building residents, which can be accessed either through an 8-foot side yard on the eastern edge of the building or directly from the building itself. Moving about a block to the west, this is the Osborne Street development site. It's an approximately 4,300 square foot corner lot with frontage on Osborne Street and Hageman Avenue. The proposed Osborne Street developments would be a 4-story residential building with 12 affordable units. The building would rise to a height of 42 feet. The building is designed to provide an approximately 32-foot side yard on the northern edge of the property, which would contain a recreation space for building residents. And this space can be accessed both from the building and also from a gate fronting on the sidewalk. So turning now to the Liberty Avenue site to the north. The site is outlined here in the white rectangle. The surrounding area contains a mix of uses. Residential uses are found generally south and west of the development site. The East New York Industrial Business Zone is located across the street to the north and generally to the east of the development site, coterminous with the M14 district seen on the map. Industrial uses in this area are found primarily within the IBZ. The development site is on a block zoned R6 that contains a school directly adjacent to the site. The area is well served by transit. The development site is located about a 7-minute walk from the Atlantic Avenue station on the L train and the Long Island Railroad East New York station. The built context in the surrounding area is mixed. There are many 1- and 2-story industrial buildings and residential buildings, also ranging from 3-story buildings to towers as high as 24 stories. In addition, there are the 2- and 4-story school buildings, which are directly adjacent to the development site. This is a view of the Liberty Avenue site from the street level. It's an approximately 4,700 square foot corner lot with frontage on Liberty Avenue and Sacman Street. The proposed Liberty Avenue developments would be a 4-story residential building with 13 affordable units. The building would rise to a height of 42 feet. The building is designed to provide a side yard ranging from 24 to 40 feet on the southern edge of the property, which would contain a recreation space for building residents. This space would be accessed either from, both from the building itself and also from a gate on the side lot line fronting on the sidewalk. In order to facilitate this development, HPD requests an Urban Development Action Area designation, project approval, and disposition of city-owned property. Brooklyn Community Board 16 held a public hearing and voted to approve the application, 16 in favor, 4 opposed, and 6 abstaining. The Brooklyn Borough President also issued a recommendation of approval. Thank you.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Thank you, Anthony. Do you know, these are relatively small development projects. Do you know whether local developers have been designated or may be involved in these projects or not?
I'm not familiar with the developer on this project. I think you'll hear from them on Wednesday, so yeah.
Is it one developer for multiple sites?
It's one developer for the 3 sites, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Burney.
Thank you. You don't actually show them in your presentation today, but in the materials that we received, there were some floor plans of the apartments. And I was noticing in particular in the Osborne building, there was a 3-bedroom apartment, I think, where the living room was smaller than one of the bedrooms. And I was looking at it, and it was very hard to imagine how anybody would occupy it if it were furnished. And there were no furniture layouts. So I was wondering, first of all, does HPD have space standards for room sizes and so on? And second of all, do they require the developers to submit furniture layout so you can demonstrate how the building would be, how the apartment would be furnished?
I have not seen the furniture layouts. I think HPD can address the question on Wednesday.
Other questions? Commissioner Rumpershad.
Yes, with regards to the one on Osborne, I noticed that they have planter boxes along the ground floor apartments. Will the residents of the apartments be responsible in case people dump garbage or anything in those planter boxes? Because it's on the street line, so I was just curious.
Yeah, the planters on the windows there is what you're referencing,
Yeah.
sort of along the windows. Yeah, I'm not sure about the responsibility of maintaining those. I think HPD and the developer can address that.
Okay.
Other comments? Okay. Oh, Commissioner Burney.
Sorry, one I forgot to ask. In terms of air conditioning, I don't see any provision for air conditioning. Is there a central system, or do people are expected to put in window units, or how does that work?
I'll have HPD address that as well.
Okay, lots of questions for HPD at the hearing, public hearing on Wednesday.
All right. The sixth item on the agenda, page 116, is a pre-hearing review of a UDAP designation project approval and disposition of city-owned property in Brooklyn Community District 3. Our presenter is Colin Lay.
Good afternoon. This is an application by the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, HPD, to request a designation and approval of urban development action area and disposition of city-owned land. This application will facilitate a new 9-story building with 59 affordable units at 776-780 Myrtle Avenue, and HPD is working with Impact Brooklyn on this development. The development site is located in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, Community District 3. The surrounding area has a mix of land uses and various building heights up to 9 stories. Directly across the street from the development site are NYCHA's Marcy houses. Open space in the area include Marcy Playground, located on Myrtle Avenue, across the street from the development site. And just south of the development site is Vernon Case's Community Garden. There's a 1-story New York City Department of Health building located on Nostrand Avenue. And on the same block east of the development site is vacant city-owned land comprised of 9 lots. HPD has plans to develop these lots in the future, which would account for 170 affordable housing units. There's also 1 building separating these lots from the development site. The surrounding area is well served by public transportation with the Myrtle Willoughby G subway station located 1 block east of the development site. And nearby buses are B54, B44, and B43. The development site is located on Myrtle Avenue between Nostrand and Marcy Avenue. The area was part of the Bed-Stuy North rezoning in 2012, and the project falls within the R7D district with a C24 commercial overlay. The development site is comprised of 3 interior lots, 19, 20, and 22. They're located on 7,500 square feet of land with 75 feet of frontage on Myrtle Avenue. Lot 19, in the early 1980s, received approval for disposition of city-owned land, but the site was never sold to another entity and remains under city ownership today. The proposed development consists of a new construction of affordable and supportive rental housing with ground floor retail, a green roof, various outdoor space, and supportive service space in the cellar. The proposed development will be developed under quality housing regulations with approximately 39,000 square feet of residential and over 3,000 square feet of commercial at a 5.3 FAR. Over half of the proposed apartments will be reserved for formerly homeless and low-income individuals and households. The remaining units will be reserved for households earning 60% area median income and below. Community Board 3 held a public hearing on May 6, 2019, and approved the application with a vote of 29 in favor and 1 opposed. The Brooklyn Borough President held a public hearing on May 29th and approved the application with modification and conditions. The modification and conditions mentioned in the Borough President's recommendations include providing more deeply affordable housing units and lowering AMIs for households earning 30, 40, and 50%, targeting seniors for smaller housing units and formerly homeless residents in Community District 3, setting aside commercial space for local nonprofit in arts and culture, and offering a below market lease term, continuing to explore resilient and sustainable measures, and introduce rain gardens and larger tree pits. To facilitate the proposed development, HPD is requesting a designation and approval of an urban development action area and disposition of city-owned land. Thank you.
Questions? Commissioner Burney.
So in this case, I was very happy to see there were apartment layouts, quite good, with furniture plans.
Yes.
So it can be done.
Okay.
But my question about the air conditioning still applies here also.
Okay. I'll ask HPD about that.
Other questions? Commissioner Rampershad.
Yeah, can they also just clarify on the roof plan, they put green roof, if they can just illustrate exactly what's going to be up there? And the elevations I see landscaping, but I don't see it on the plan, so if they can
Okay.
just clarify what's going up there. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, we'll see this again at the public hearing on Wednesday.
Thank you.
The seventh item on the agenda, page 151, is a pre-hearing review of a zoning map amendment in Brooklyn Community District 5, and our presenter is Alexander Patty Diaz.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Lemos Petroleum Inc. proposed a zoning map amendment to establish a C24 commercial overlay to facilitate the construction of a new one-story commercial building in Brooklyn. The project area is in East New York neighborhood of Brooklyn, Community District 5. And the proposed rezoning area consists of 3 contiguous tax lots, Block 4151, lots 1, 54, and 107, located on the northern side of Atlantic Avenue between Grant and Nicholas Avenues. The tax lots have a combined area of approximately 24,000 square feet. The development site is located at 3513 Atlantic Avenue, which is on the northern side of Atlantic Avenue. And the area is within an R5 zoning district. Surrounding area is characterized by a mix of low-density residential uses. The project area is 2 blocks east of the East New York rezoning area, as well as 1 block west of the border between the boroughs of Brooklyn and Queens. The site is close to public transportation. The Crescent Street J subway station is located 4 blocks northwest on Fulton Street. Lot 1 is approximately 4,600 square feet corner lot located on the intersection formed by Atlantic and Nicholas Avenue. Lot 1 is improved with a small 1-story building occupied by an automobile sales business with an open sales lot. Lot 54, the proposed development site described further below, is located at the intersection formed by Atlantic and Grand Avenues. It is improved with 2 abutting 1-story buildings occupied by a gas station and a convenience store. Lot 107 is a 625 square foot vacant, unimproved interior lot that has no street frontage. This is a view of the development site from Atlantic Avenue. The proposed development is a new 1-story commercial building that will be divided to accommodate 2 separate retail stores. One space will have entrances from Atlantic and Grant Avenue, and the other will have an entrance on Grant Avenue. The proposed development will have approximately 9,800 square feet of commercial floor area and 6 unenclosed accessory parking spaces. The one-story building will rise to a height up to 19 feet. The proposed development will have 2 12-foot curb cuts to provide access to and from the parking area, and it includes an enclosed loading berth at the rear of the building, and the loading berth entrance is on Atlantic Avenue. The action necessary to facilitate the proposed development is a zoning map amendment to establish a C24 commercial overlay in the existing R5 zoning district. The zoning map amendment is necessary to permit the development of new commercial use within the rezoning area. This project was certified by the City Planning Commission on March 11th. Community Board 5 did not hold a meeting on this project. I want to share that the Land Use Committee of Community Board 5 hasn't had quorum since February. That's why you have been seeing a lot of projects without their recommendations or votes. The full board also hasn't had a quorum since then, and they're holding a special meeting this Wednesday to discuss several projects, and we encourage them to provide their recommendations and vote as they see fit. The Brooklyn Borough President held a hearing on May 1st and approved the application with modifications for the City Council to obtain commitments in writing for the applicant to clarify how they will implement streetscape and resiliency strategies along their development, and to be coordinated with other city agencies and the CB5. The City Planning Commission public hearing is scheduled for next Wednesday.
This Wednesday.
This Wednesday. Yes, this Wednesday. Yeah.
Questions from the commission? Commissioner Ramprasad.
Has the owner been in contact with DOT for authorization to have a curb cut less than 50 feet from the corner?
Not to my knowledge, but I will instruct the applicant to clarify that on public hearing.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, I know we have an existing curb cut here, but, it is an issue for me and a cause of concern when we're trying to create pedestrian environments. If there any way that, there are actually 2 curb cuts. If we could remove a curb cut from Atlantic, if the applicant could speak to the decision around curb cuts in general,
Okay.
that would be helpful.
Yeah, just to clarify, one curb cut is proposed in Atlantic and the other one in Grand Avenue.
Yeah, I
And right
understand.
now, there's a huge curb cut. Yes.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But as we densify
Okay.
here and we want to create walkable environments, and also, I see that this is a petroleum company. What, is it just their office space?
To my understanding, the use of one of the retail stores is going to be an AutoZone store. And to my knowledge, this corporation, it's part of that, or owns that business. But I can tell the applicant to clarify
That would be cool.
who's the applicant and their attachment
And
to
their
the project.
proposal for that space, the
Okay.
use, or tenant if they know. Thank you.
Commissioner De La Hoz.
And if there's a history of contamination on the site or any cleanup that's planned, if they could speak to that at the hearing as well on Wednesday. Thanks.
Commissioner Marin.
I just have sort of a point of observation. I know that we're using Lot 107, I think, as part of this application. I see there's a Lot 108. I'm not going to assume, but I'm going to ask, do we know if this area of non-street facing lots continues through the entire block? I know that it's not part of the application, I
Right.
realize that.
From what I read from the tax map and the area map, that's only for 107 and 108.
Thank you,
It doesn't continue.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay. Another one for the public hearing on Wednesday.
Item 8 on the agenda has been laid over. Item 9, page 212 is a post-referral review of a non-ULURP minor modification to a previously approved special permit in Brooklyn Community District 2. Our presenter is Kevin Kraft.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a private application by Brooklyn Urban Retail Partners, LLP, for a minor modification of a previously approved special permit to allow signage that exceeds the otherwise applicable regulations to facilitate the redevelopment of Admiral's Row on a portion of the Brooklyn Navy Yard in Community District 2, Brooklyn. As you may recall, in 2011, multiple actions were approved to facilitate the construction of an approximately 287,000 square foot mixed-use development known as Admiral's Row Plaza that consists of retail, including a Wegmans supermarket, as well as industrial and community facility nonprofit floor area within 5 buildings. Due to architectural refinement over time, the applicant is seeking a minor modification to change the previously approved signs for buildings A, C, and E. For building A, the applicant is proposing 3 changes. First, the Brooklyn Navy Yard identification sign would be shifted to the left. The second change would be to move the anchor tenant signage, to rearrange the anchor tenant signage from a band sign to a rectangular sign. And the third change would be to shift the anchor tenant sign to the east. For building C, the applicants are proposing to adjust the group signage from a vertical orientation to a horizontal orientation. On the east side of the building, the applicant is proposing to shift the signage slightly to the right. And on the Navy Street side, shifting the signage 3 feet to the right. For building E, the applicant is requesting to shift the anchor tenant sign to the west. They are also proposing to reconfigure the group signage for building E and to shift that sign west directly below the anchor tenant sign. The proposed modification received New York City Public Design Commission approval in January 2019. The project site is currently under construction and is nearing completion. On July 10th, 2019, Brooklyn Community Board 2 submitted a letter to waive its opportunity to review the application based on the Community Board's past support for the project and the minimal changes to the proposed signage. Thank you.
Any questions? The Community Board acted with alacrity on this one. I think everyone is awaiting the Wegmans. So I will ask for an assent by show of hands to be able to send a letter to the Department of Buildings confirming that this is a minor modification. Done.
Item 10, page 244, is a pre-hearing review of a bid expansion in Queens Community District 7. Our presenter is Jackie Sunwo.
Good afternoon. My name is Jackie, and I am here to present the amended district plan for Downtown Flushing Business Improvement District, or the BID. I do want to note that there is an existing BID in Downtown Flushing today that was established in 2003, so this proposal here is to actually expand the boundaries. Downtown Flushing is located in the borough of Queens and serves as a major transportation and retail hub in northern Queens. It is located at the end of the 7 subway line and also maintains a Long Island Railroad station on Main Street and 40th Road. Downtown Flushing is a vibrant commercial neighborhood serving primarily to a growing Asian community as well as many other diverse groups and tourists. Aside from the active retail and residential character, Flushing is also a regional center for northern Queens and has an active office market, hotels, many community and cultural facilities. Since the Flushing BID was established in 2003, the neighborhood has grown drastically, and the downtown Flushing expanded to adjacent corridors that weren't before considered as core commercial areas. But with substantial growth also resulted in key concerns for traffic, security, sanitation, and beautification outside of the current boundaries. So this map here shows the current bid boundary in downtown Flushing. It includes properties primarily along Main Street here and Roosevelt Avenue here. Many of the recent concerns that I listed were actually not only on the main streets here, but outside of the current boundaries of the bid. Consequently, there is a greater need for additional services to improve the overall experience in Flushing, as well as quality of life for the residents, businesses, and tourists. So the amended district plan for the Flushing bid will include a larger area in downtown. The service area will include more streets to the west, including College Point Boulevard, as well as Union Street to the east and the blocks to the south. With the expansion of the bid, there will be approximately 2,000 businesses included, which is roughly 900 additional businesses from the current bid. These include restaurants, food courts, supermarkets, pharmacies, personal care salons, and many more. The district also serves a predominantly low and moderate to middle class income population in central Flushing. Within the expanded boundary, there are roughly 1,550 residential units, 60% of which are homeowner occupied. But currently, with the growth, there is a very strong rental market in Flushing as well. So this map shows the land use in Flushing bid. As you can see, it's very dynamic with Main Street and Roosevelt Avenue having a lot of commercial and mixed use. There are also a multifamily residential building, as well as a few manufacturing and public facilities in the area as well. The area is zoned from C42 through C45X, with residential perimeters ranging from R6 to R71. There are a few manufacturing districts in the surrounding as well, ranging from M11 to M31. I should note that there is a zoning action coming to the Flushing waterfront, and it will be a proposal to encourage more commercial and residential development along the waterfront here. Right here. So only a portion of the expanded bid will be actually a part of the zoning study. The proposal of the bid expansion is a 5-year process between the steering committee, the local community, the Flushing District Management Association, or the DMA, and council member Peter Koo. After the steering committee was formed in 2014, they did extensive outreach to all the stakeholders to come up with this proposal here. So to highlight the neighborhood needs survey that was conducted in 2015, identify what the community thought was the greatest need in the neighborhood. And the general consensus was that the top concerns were traffic, sanitation, security, and beautification. And these are actually divided into different stakeholders. So based on the outreach efforts of the DMA, the services in the amended district will include street maintenance in the growing areas of downtown, such as sweeping sidewalks and graffiti cleaning, marketing to advertise the neighborhood, beautification services such as landscaping and seasonal planting, and traffic management to improve pedestrian experience and traffic congestion. So their plan right now is to hire 1 to 2 people to manage pedestrian flow in the main intersections of the neighborhood. And administration and advocacy, as well as additional services, will be included within the services. So this table here shows the breakdown of how the budget will be utilized. The budget for the current Flushing bid right now is $380,000, and it has not increased since the establishment in 2003. But with the amended district plan, the budget will now be $1 million, which is considered still very modest, considering the scale and the size of the bid. Each property will be assessed an amount in proportion to the benefit that they will be receiving from the bid services. And this is how the assessment formula looks like. All properties as classified in the most recent New York City tax rolls are divided into Class A, B, C, and D, and they will all be assessed differently. So for Class A, which are commercial properties or mixed-use buildings with commercial on the ground floor, they will be assessed a base fee of $250, and rates using linear from footage and assessed valuation. In Class B, which are residential buildings, and these are only wholly residential buildings, will be assessed $1 per year. Class C, which are non-for-profit and government properties, will not be assessed. Class D, which is vacant parcels or undeveloped lots, will be assessed the same manner as Class A. The bid does project that the median price the property owners will pay will be roughly $405 per year, and 79% of the property owners will pay less than $1,000 a year after the expansion. And lastly, Community Board 7, which is where downtown Flushing is located in, they strongly approve and support this plan. Thank you.
Questions from the commission? Commissioner Burney.
Do you know when the bid is expanded like this, are there any proposed changes in the governance? That's to say, is the board of the bid expanded to represent the additional people that are being brought into the coverage area?
Not to my knowledge, actually, but I will ask the bid to clarify that when they come in on Wednesday for the public hearing. Yeah.
Other questions? Commissioner Ortiz.
You mentioned that, under the amendment that on average, each property owner will be paying $4 or $5 a year. Is that different from the previous average? Has that gone up or?
That's what I assumed because the budget was a lot lower, but also included a smaller area. So I'll also ask bid how that works.
I think we'll also want to ask about the, could you go back to the slide that shows how the budget is being spent?
This one, right?
Yeah, okay. It seemed very, very small amount on marketing and beautification. It may well be that marketing isn't needed because word of mouth is already bringing sufficient trade, but certainly the amount on beautification is extremely small, particularly when one looks at other bids. Okay, so we will see this on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Item 11, page 256, is a pre-hearing review of a non-ULURP UDAP designation in the Bronx Community District 4. Our presenter is James Moralia.
Ryan, it was 250 in my packet.
250? Okay.
I spent valuable time, Brian, scurrying through pages trying to find.
Keep you on your toes, Commissioner.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is the Bronx Point Project. If you recall, this was referred out on June 17th by the Commission. A quick review of the project. The applicant is HPD. It's located at 575 Exterior Street in Community District 4. They're requesting a non-ULURP UDAP designation and project approval. And if you recall, this was the Lower Concourse North project approved by the Commission in 8/23 for various actions, including a disposition, zoning map amendment, zoning text amendment, and a special permit. The project is located just north of the 145th Street Bridge, just east of the Harlem River, just south of the Mill Pond Park. It's well served by mass transportation. The zoning is R72C25. It's also within the Harlem River Waterfront District, which regulates the bulk and waterfront access and sites that are within it. And here you can see again that it's just south of the Mill Pond Park. A couple of photographs to remind you of the site. The Oaklink rail link runs down the Harlem River adjacent to it. Portions of it are actually out in the Harlem River. Here we see shots from Mill Pond Park looking at the site. More shots from the park looking at the site across the river to Manhattan, and then finally the vacant site itself with the Deegan running adjacent to it. The UDAP is necessary to help facilitate financing of the open space within the project area, including an upland connection, a shore public walkway, a supplemental access area, a public plaza along Exterior Street, public access throughout the whole site. And then if you notice that it also includes improvements to Mill Pond Park, the pink outline there on the site plan is the UDAP designation, which is bigger than the actual zoning lot, which is the black dotted line. So outside of the zoning lot and the project site are improvements to Mill Pond Park, Park, which include a new playground, a new fitness facilities, expanded barbecue area, a rehabilitated revetment along the entire Harlem River. And all of these waterfront requirements will be met as part of Phase 1 of this project. The Phase 1 building is the very large building you see to the left of the drive. Phase 2 building doesn't have a firm date yet, but it's to the right of the drive there and adjacent to the bridge. Here is a rendering of it looking north to south. That's the Phase 1 building itself. It's 540 units of affordable housing. Here we see the rail link again and the improved park. Phase 2 is behind that, ghosted in, as you can see. Again, that doesn't have a firm date for being built yet. Here's a rendering of the site from underneath the highway. Again, there'll be retail on the first floor. There'll be a museum, the Hip Hop Museum on the second floor, and then again, the housing. And here's a rendering of the Phase 1 and all of its open space. Ghosted right behind it is the Phase 2 building, and across and south to the bridge is a building that could be built under the as-of-right Harlem River waterfront regulations. Community Board 4 voted to issue a letter recommending this approval back in September of 2018. They support this, obviously. That letter was sent on May 6th to our chair, and that letter is in your package. And that concludes the presentation.
Questions? Commissioner Burney.
It's really terrific to see this waterfront park development. And the design looks terrific. I'm just wondering, I mean, it's kind of trapped between the Deegan and the railway. Is DOT looking at any way of improving pedestrian access to get to that particular park from the other side of the Deegan or from where people might come?
Well, yes, part of this was a very large initiative from the mayor's office to do improvements throughout the entire area, including lighting, street improvements, traffic improvements. There had been a lot of back and forth, and most of that was done during that lower concourse project, which was the actual disposition for this site that occurred in 2017. But yes, there's been extensive work on that, and including lots of lighting underneath the Deegan itself. This is the public plaza, which was part of the programming, so that's right underneath, and so it's really to bring people down to the waterfront and enliven it through lighting, seating, et cetera.
Terrific, thanks.
Okay.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi.
Hi.
I remember this because we had some discussion about where sort of the retail made sense and where, it should be concentrated. Could you remind me sort of where we ended up with respect to where the retail activity would?
Sure, let me find the property. Okay, yeah, this is probably a good one. So the entire front along the Deegan, which is what this is here, will be retail. Then there'll be, actually, let me go to the site plan. It's probably, so we can walk around it. That's much better. So along the Deegan there to the north is going to be the retail entrances and the entrances to the theater. If you come down the drive, those will be the entrances to the residential. As you come all the way down the drive and make the turn towards the waterfront, a community facility there is slated to go there, and it seems to be one of the maritime schools for high school students. I think a part of the Oyster Project. I don't know if that's certain. On Wednesday, we can obviously talk to the applicants about the exact nature of that. As we go around the waterfront there, you'll have these big public esplanade steps and then access to the museum and more retail. And then as you come up the other side of the building where it's the sawtooth, that'll be retail as well, but not retail entrances.
Could we see a floor plan on Wednesday when they present?
I will ask them for sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Yeah, but Jim, the retail actually wouldn't be visible from the Deegan, right?
It would not, but you'd be above it.
I mean,
It's exterior street,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, right. Part of the text amendment that we did in 2017 on this was to allow the commercial to rise, be on the same floor or above residential. So the entire sheer face of the building facing the Deegan is all commercial all the way up. There won't be residences facing the Deegan. So the residences are actually shielded from the highway. And then below, of course, is the exterior street where the ground floor residence will be. And the entrances, and obviously the entrances to the theater, to the museum, and as you around the corner, there's retail, then the rest is residential entrances and uses along the drive. But again, we will definitely have them bring the floor plans showing in the uses, the latest plans.
Commissioner Deleuze.
Was this going to be the original location of the Hip Hop Museum, or was there another development that was going to house the museum?
I believe there was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Is that what you're talking about? That I'm not sure of, but I do know that this was, as they were developing this has been the primary.
Intended.
Yeah, this is the primary location since I've heard of this project 3 or 4 years ago. But I do believe there was another location somewhere else, but I'm not sure about that.
It was just curiosity, honestly. Okay.
Yeah.
They can always speak to it later. Thanks.
Other questions? Okay, we'll set the public hearing on Wednesday.
Item 12, page 264, is a pre-hearing review of a special permit in Manhattan Community District 1. Our presenter is Allison Brown.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. 121 Chambers Street, LLC is seeking approval. There we go. Seeking approval for a special permit for landmark preservation in all districts in order to facilitate a height increase to an existing 5-story through-block building located at 121 Chambers Street and 103 Reed Street within the Tribeca South Historic District. The project was presented to and certified by the Commission on April 8th of this year. The site, located here in the red solid line, is a through lot between Chambers Street and Reed Street, located on the block bounded by Church Street to the east and West Broadway to the west, within the Tribeca neighborhood of Lower Manhattan. The site is located in a C6 3A zoning district in area A3 of the Special Tribeca Mixed Use District. The allowed FAR in this district is 7.52 for residential, 6 for commercial, and 7.5 for community facility use. The site itself is located in the Tribeca South Historic District, the boundaries of which are shown in the red dashed line. The development site is 150 feet deep, 25 feet wide, through block building, as mentioned before, with frontages on both Chambers Street and Reed Street. The existing building is a vacant 5-story building plus cellar and subcellar. The existing building contains 18,000 square feet of floor area and an FAR of 4.95. The applicant is proposing to construct a 2-story vertical enlargement to the existing building and add new mezzanines between the 2nd and 3rd floors and between the 4th and 5th floors as part of as-of-right interior alterations. The proposed development would be a 7-story mixed-use building with residential uses on the 2nd through 7th floor and retail on the 1st floor. There would be 8 market-rate residential rental units within the building. The proposed development would contain 24,000 square feet of floor area and an FAR of 6.52, which is less than the maximum amount permitted. Shown in cross-section, the enlargement would extend through the entire length of the through-block building, with setbacks varying from 20 to 44 feet from both frontages. In conjunction with the proposed development, the applicant will also be undertaking several renovations to the building, including restoring the storefronts to the original 19th century appearance, exposing and restoring all decorative parts of cast iron elements, removing the non-original fire escape on Reed Street, and making necessary repairs to sandstone facades, and replacing all 24 windows on both street frontages. In order to achieve the proposed enlargement, the applicant is requesting waivers for height. The applicant seeks a special permit pursuant to ZR Section 74-711 for a waiver of the height enlargement limit of Section 11120 in order to allow the construction of a 7th floor and an overall increase in height of 18 feet to the existing building. The Commission may permit modification of bulk regulations as long as the conditions and findings are met. In regards to the conditions, the Landmarks Preservation Commission issued a certificate of appropriateness in January of 2019. And pursuant to the approval of this application, the applicant will pursue a restrictive declaration in order to meet the condition of a continued maintenance plan. The application was referred to Manhattan Community Board 1 and the Manhattan Borough President's Office. Manhattan Community Board 1 voted in approval with no conditions, and the Borough President recommends approval with no conditions.
Questions? Okay, we'll see this on Wednesday at the public hearing.
Item 13, page 307, is a pre-hearing review of a zoning text amendment and acquisitions in Manhattan Community Districts 3 and 6. Our presenter is Matthew Pietris.
Good afternoon. This is the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project, which was certified on April 22nd. It is a city application by the New York City Departments of Transportation, Citywide Administrative Services, Environmental Protection, and Small Business Services for acquisitions of real property and a zoning text amendment to facilitate the project. It is located in Manhattan Community Districts 3 and 6. The proposed project extends from Montgomery Street on the south and the Lower East Side to East 25th Street. It's in response to flood vulnerability made evident by Hurricane Sandy in 2012. Since then, the city studied coastal resiliency, published Plan NYC, and launched Rebuild by Design to solicit ideas for coastal protection. In 2014, the Big U was announced the winner of the competition, and this project is one compartment of that design. This slide shows the extent of the project, most of which is located within map beds of streets and city-owned land, including the largest portion, which is in East River Park. The flood protection system includes park improvements, flood walls, closure structures, and sewer improvements. The image on the top shows the existing conditions within East River Park. At roughly 8 feet in elevation, the park would flood during the design storm event. The project proposes to raise the elevation of the park between 8 and 9 feet to exceed the elevation of the design flood event, which is 16.5 feet. This is a rendering showing the effect of raising the park. On the left is the park during a non-storm event. Here, the majority of the park is elevated with a step-down condition, here on the left. On the right is the park during the design storm event. While the step-down esplanade does flood, the remainder of the park remains protected. This image shows the proposed upgrades to the sewer system. The dark blue line is the interceptor line, which is a 9-foot in diameter sewer, which brings combined sewage to the Manhattan pump station. The light blue lines are proposed parallel conveyance or shortcut sewers, which will reduce flooding from rain events. There are also interceptor gatehouses shown in gray, which will close the sewer system during storm events to prevent the bathtub effect or flooding from behind the system. To facilitate the project, the city requests eight acquisitions of real property and a text amendment. The first of these acquisitions are related to the improved sewer system. This includes proposed drainage modifications at East River houses. The proposed action area is seen here in red and will allow the city to operate, inspect, and maintain the proposed sewer upgrades, which are located underground. The next acquisition is also related to parallel conveyance. At Neitch's Baruch houses, the city would require access to maintain, operate, and inspect the underground sewer improvements at the corner of Columbia and Houston Streets. That area is in red. The next few acquisitions are related to easements to maintain flood walls, the first of which is at Gouverneur Gardens. Here, the city proposes building a flood wall on the map bed of street on the corner of Montgomery and South Streets. Directly behind the wall is Gouverneur Gardens property. To maintain the flood wall, the city requires access to Gouverneur Gardens lot. In addition to access, the acquisition would prohibit the planting of deep-rooted trees, as these could damage the flood wall and compromise the system. Similarly, the next acquisition is for a flood wall at Neitch's Jacob Rees houses. Like Gouverneur Gardens, the flood wall will run adjacent to Rees houses on the map bed of street along the FDR. On Rees houses property, the city requires access to maintain and inspect the flood wall. Here, an existing fence and one tree would need to be removed to accommodate the flood wall. Following the flood wall north, the next acquisition is at the Con Ed generating station. The acquisition would also allow the city access to maintain, Here, the acquisition would also allow the city access to maintain, inspect, and operate the watertight connection to the north and south of the building. It would also allow the city access to the interior of the generating station to maintain and operate and repair the existing flood protection system that is integrated within the building. On the north of the generating station, the city requests an acquisition to maintain the flood system adjacent to Con Edison's parking lot. Here, the flood protection system is a series of flood walls and flood gates located in the map bed of street along the FDR. The approximate location of the acquisition area is shown here in red. The city requires access to maintain, operate, and inspect the system from within Con Ed's parking lot. Parking would only be interrupted when the flood wall requires maintenance. Otherwise, the parking spots will remain. The next acquisition is for access at the VA Medical Center at the northern end of the system. From Astor-Levy Park, the system ties into the existing flood protection at the VA Medical Center. While no acquisition is needed to maintain the proposed flood protection from within Astor-Levy Park, the city requires access to a portion of the VA Medical Center's lot to maintain the existing flood protection system and the proposed watertight connection to it. The final acquisition is from the New York State Department of Transportation to construct the proposed flyover bridge. The proposed flyover bridge would address a pinch point along the East River Greenway, where the width of the path decreases to about 30 inches at its narrowest. The proposed bridge would begin at the north end of East River Park and land in Captain Patrick Brown Walk, which is owned by the New York State Department of Transportation. Here, the city requests an acquisition for a portion of the mapped FDR where the footings of the bridge would land. That area is in red. In addition to acquisitions of real property, the city requests a text amendment that would waive the design and visual corridors requirements at Stuyvesant Cove Park. If the project were to achieve full compliance with waterfront zoning regulations, it could compromise the effectiveness of the entire system. For instance, the zoning resolution requires that no walls be higher than 21 inches, which is well below the required 8 to 9 feet necessary to meet the design flood elevation. There are also visual corridor and Upton connection requirements which could compromise the effectiveness of the system. To summarize, the applicants seek 8 acquisitions of real property and a text amendment to ensure the flood protection system remains operational and effective. The locations of those actions are here. The draft environmental impact statement includes a detailed analysis of 14 categories. The analysis found no impacts in 12 categories and found the potential for significant adverse impacts in 2 categories. The city is currently exploring measures to mitigate those impacts. The project was referred to Manhattan Community Boards 3 and 6, as well as the Borough President and the Borough Board, each recommending approval with conditions. These are some of the conditions and concerns submitted by the reviewing bodies. Many of the concerns were related to the 3.5-year construction period, during which time East River Park is proposed to be closed. With this, there were concerns about alternative open spaces to mitigate that loss, including spaces for youth sports leagues and the potential to activate other areas throughout the neighborhoods. There were also concerns related to community engagement as it relates to design and construction. The community boards have requested regular updates during construction related to the rerouting of bicycle and pedestrians, air quality and noise updates, and the potential to phase East River Park's construction and opening. Related to design, there were concerns about the loss of trees and habitat, as well as temporary and immediate flood protection during the construction of the project. At certification, there were questions from the commissioners related to potential displacement of water outside the project area, access to ferries during construction, and ongoing community engagement during construction. I'm happy to take questions as it relates to those, but the applicant team is prepared to answer those on Wednesday. Commissioner Levin raised a question regarding the text amendment as it relates to satisfying waterfront regulations for Stuyvesant Cove Park and city planning's involvement in that design. While the text amendment does satisfy these requirements, city planning's approach to this action attempts to balance flexibility in design to allow for community input while providing adequate flood protection, timing sensitivity as it relates to achieving a completed project by the 2023 hurricane season, and ongoing input from DCP. Before the application was certified, DCP has been involved with the city team in the park's design, participating in charrettes and public workshops. We have continued our review of the design, providing input as part of the Public Design Commission's review of the design, and in the future, we will continue to work with the city team as design advances. In sum, the city requests acquisitions of real property and a text amendment to facilitate the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project. Happy to take any questions.
I'll just note that of all of the matters that we heard today, there was not a single community board or borough president recommendation against. Nice to see. Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi. How does this connect, or how is the coordination occurring between this and the plan to raise East River Park? How are these projects related or not related? They both attempt to address issues of resiliency. So are they redundant?
It's the same. It's the same project. The actions within East, there are no required land use actions within East River Park because it's parkland, but it's the same project.
But when you talked about the flood walls themselves, I guess I'm trying to understand, we're raising the park, I understand that.
Sure.
And the flood walls themselves are behind it.
So let me go back to the first slide.
Is that a redundancy?
So the flood walls exist, I think it's actually the first slide.
I just want to understand how those two, I understand it's the same application, but I see them as two separate pieces of work.
So flood walls are going to be generally outside. The flood walls you'll see are generally outside of East River Park, where the flood wall, there is actually a flood wall within East River Park, but it's going to be buried beneath the park. So that's this line shown here. There's no actions needed to put that in there. So there's just the alignment from Montgomery Street, which basically goes all the way up to East 25th Street. And only the
Most of the walls are off at an area where there is no redundancy.
Yes. Okay. All the walls you'll see are going to be outside of East River Park.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Thank you. Could you go a couple of slides up where you depict that's the park. The ones where you show where the Con Ed facility is.
Sure.
Yeah.
This one?
Yeah. Now, those flood walls there, what would be their height? The ones on the west side of the drive? Like.
Yeah, let me pull up.
Like.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right. No, yeah.
Right here, right? Or on the.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. What would be the height of those flood walls?
Generally between 8 and 9 feet. We can get the exact height of those. It needs to meet that 16.5 feet design elevation.
Right.
At Con Ed, this is already a wall.
Right.
It's just integrated within the building, but there will be walls that connect to it on the north and south of the building. And then a watertight connection to make sure that there's no flooding where the walls do meet the building.
And on the exterior of Stuytown and Peter Cooper, are there
in here?
walls there as well?
The wall here is going to be in Stuyvesant Cove Park. So you can see the wall is actually going to be here. The design currently will berm up to parts of it. So the wall height, while it is between 8 and 9 feet, it's going to, that condition will only be met or you'll only see the 8 and 9 feet kind of at the ends. The design tries to integrate those.
What's the total elevation of that? It's 8 to 9 feet from the base there, but.
Yeah, so from the bottom of the wall up to the top.
No, but how high is the bottom of the wall from the water?
The bottom of the wall to the water?
You're building a wall that's 8 to 9 feet on that platform there.
Yeah, so the top of the wall, the top of every part of the system will be 16.5 feet. So it's actually going to vary throughout. But we can actually, if it's helpful, we can have the applicants walk through the specific heights everywhere you'll see a wall on Wednesday.
Commissioner Delos.
Are we expecting reps from NYCHA, Con Ed, and Gouverneur Gardens to be at the hearing at all?
They may speak in the public hearing. They aren't part of the applicant team, though.
I understand that, but considering the fact that the facilities, are going to be on their property, be helpful, I think, to hear from them as well.
Commissioner Ramprasad.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on that. I was going to ask for clarification. I see that there on a lot of these maps in the package that we have, says approximate location of acquisition area. Do we have an exact square footage or a dimension around that area?
No, so the acquisition areas are approximate now because they may actually need to change depending on how much room the city will need to have easements for them. That's an approximate location just to give an illustrative example of how big it's going to be.
Okay. Have they been to the sites to just see if there's any current or underground systems from the buildings that are there in that location?
Yes.
Just to verify? Okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Burney.
I don't quite understand. When you say acquisition, what they really need is access to maintain these sewer facilities, right? So would the residents of those residential buildings still have beneficial use of that property in the meantime? Because it just seems, I'm a little concerned that if you do an acquisition, then what they do is they put a chain link fence around it, it gets overgrown, nobody can use it. Whereas if it's an easement, the residents can still use the space as long as it's kept open for their access.
All of the acquisitions are proposed for easements. I can show a picture that might help.
So what's the difference between an acquisition and an easement?
So we don't have an action to have an acquisition.
For acquiring the easement.
It's for acquiring an easement. It's just that the
It means you take it, you know, but that's not what they're saying. Okay.
For ULURP purposes, it's the acquisition of an easement, and so it requires ULURP, but it is an easement that is being granted.
That answers my question. Thank you.
If it's helpful, there's a rendering up here of this is Gouverneur Gardens and the wall here. So there's no fence around it. The city just needs to get behind it to make sure that the wall isn't defective.
Terrific.
Other questions? Okay, we'll have a public hearing on Wednesday.
Great, thank you.
Okay, for July 31st, staff have prepared reports for consideration for the East New York North Cluster and the Kew Gardens Hills rezoning. Also scheduled for decision on July 31st are 45 Douglas Court, 16 McGuire Avenue, 66 Oswald Place, 446 and 445 Vineland Avenue, and 412 and 406 Woods of Arden Road. All of these are South Richmond actions. On August 14th, there are a number of landmark designations. The first 7 of them stemmed from a commitment by the city to examine a stretch of Broadway south of Union Square. These are 817, 826, 830, 832, 836, 840 Broadway, and the Roosevelt Building at 841 Broadway. Landmark designations also considered on August 14th, the National Society of Colonial Dames, I don't know why that name made me laugh, in the state of New York headquarters, and the First Hungarian Reformed Church. The next 6 landmark designations are in connection with the Landmarks Preservation Commission's examination of sites significant to the city's LGBTQ history. And these are Cafe Chino, the Gay Activists Alliance Firehouse, the Women's Liberation Center, the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender Community Center, the James Baldwin residence, and the Andre Lord residence. On the last, you have a revised briefing sheet that was left on the dais, and I'll just point out the revision is just in the last sentence that clarifies that the R3X zoning district is exempt from the transfer of development rights, and therefore there was no analysis done for that. Okay. And then for post-hearing follow-up, oh wait, Chair, did you have comments on the, no, you didn't. Okay, that's right. For post-hearing follow-up, we have the borough-based jails. Taylor Wolfson and Eric Gregory are here to discuss.
Good afternoon, Commission. We are back today to follow up on outstanding items from the CPC hearing held for the borough-based jails proposal on July 10th, 2019. As you can see on the screen, we have separated the items into 2 review sessions. Today, we will be discussing policy and operational issues that we ask the applicant to follow up on and share the department's urban design recommendations for the proposal. At the next review session on August 12th, we plan to discuss updated heights and square footage of the proposed facilities and dive deeper into the master plan, justice implementation task force work, and the design build process moving forward. Included in your briefing packages was a letter from the applicant team responding to a number of items raised at the hearing. In looking at the criminal justice reform and policy decisions, as well as the environmental review questions, staff believes that the answers address the questions that were raised, but would be happy to elaborate. Eric Gregory from our urban design team will be discussing the urban design and pedestrian realm topics later in the presentation. Is there anything in the letter that the commission would like to discuss further?
I'll just clarify that in the first bucket, there were issues on which there was a lot of testimony where the commission had interest, but that didn't go specifically to the land use matter before us. We asked the applicant team to give us a comprehensive response. That's the letter that was in our packet. And again, if you would want a discussion on any of these topics, we would be glad to do so. The sense of the department is that the letter was responsive on the first bucket and the second. The third bucket clearly goes to the decision before us, but rather than pull it out as Eric goes through his design presentation, the department's design recommendations, he'll cover those final 4 bullet points. Commissioner Burney.
Just one thing, under the pedestrian realm, we discussed on the Brooklyn site ensuring that we got at least 50% transparency on Atlantic, and I think you mentioned that you were going to do that, but I didn't see it in the letter. So.
Okay.
Eric will be covering that in his presentation.
Yeah. Great. So with that, I will hand it off to Eric.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. So I'll walk you through the urban design recommendations, some that were on the previous slide addressed in the applicant letter, and most more from the standpoint of the department's recommendations. So these are kind of the buckets that you see, and we'll walk through each of them now. First and foremost, our goal when approaching this project is to ensure that it is a unique program, a unique building, a once in a lifetime that buildings of this nature, four of them will be here. And our goal is really to ensure that the urban design outcomes will be positive and ensure that the program and the goals set forth for the interior spaces can be delivered. So, a lot of the things that we typically would look for on projects, active ground floors, how the entries work, where they're located, setbacks, the depths of those setbacks, the heights of those setbacks, all things that we are focused on at this point, knowing that this is kind of the beginning process as we drift into the design going forward if this passes through ULURP. So certainly we have a lot of other things that we want to continue to work on, but for the time being, we're really focused in on these. We'll talk a little bit more about the applicant's guiding principles, both the master plan team and the previous effort of the Justice Task Force on design. But for the department, we really just kind of focused in on these 3 buckets. This is a civic building, and making sure it has that presence, especially at the ground floor, and that the entries are welcoming, well-defined and clear. That the building supports and complements the surrounding neighborhood. And of course, that I think a lot of the notes that you guys and comments that you've put forward when this project has been presented to you is around concerns around the ground floor, the activity, the transparency, the depth of retail. So all these are things that have been on our radar that we'll talk about. And of course, incorporating setbacks to match the adjacent character. The last bucket, I think, really speaks more to, as this project moves forward, really having an architectural design that, the articulation is going to be key, materiality and fenestration will be key. So again, those are things that we will look forward to continue to work with that applicant team and the DDC and the program consultant. So setbacks, of course, these are the standard that we would typically ask, 10 feet on a wide street, 15 feet on a narrow. with base heights kind of matching the context. We felt it was appropriate that these 4 sites all incorporated setbacks. So I'll walk you through each one. On Manhattan, again, and I will say on the setbacks, the key was to stay within the current envelopes. So you'll see as we get into a couple of the sites where the depths are a little bit more challenged, and that's really to keep to make sure that we stay within, the height stays within the envelope. So on Manhattan, these are a little bit more straightforward. We were able to achieve 10 feet on Center Street, which is a wide street, 15 on Baxter, narrow, and also fronting the lower scale Chinatown context to the east, plan north. And then on the setbacks, the department felt 105 feet on Center Street is a max base height, was more in kind with the civic nature and taller base heights we see on Center Street, while the 85 feet is more stepping down to meet the lower scale context. In the Bronx, similar with 141st Street to the south, we've recommended a 10-foot setback and a 15-foot setback on 142nd Street to the north. Again, responding, while the uses are mixed going north, there is much more residential character as you drift to the northwest of the site. Another thing to point out is that we are not asking for any type of a setback along the Bruckner Boulevard, Southern Boulevard frontage. We feel that this site, unlike Manhattan and Brooklyn, has a larger lot area with the potential to, and later as we work to push for the design in later stages, that we could push the bulk of this building towards the Bruckner. So we've left that flexibility for future design teams. And again here, a max base height of 105, which is in kind with the proposed future development that would happen to the western portion of the site. A lot of the illustrative drawings that the master planning consultant teams have put forward are showing a much lower base. So we didn't want to specify any minimums here, and thus actually Brooklyn is the only site that we're proposing a minimum. And of course, to the Sally Port that's dividing that future development from the facility will be, I believe it's roughly 30 feet. So there will be, the building itself will be kind of pushing back away from that. On Queens, again, we felt these are wide street conditions, 126th Street to the south and 132nd Street to the north. And here we've been able to get, we're recommending 10 feet as the setback, again, with a max base height of 105. Again, applicant teams are showing base heights much lower, 1 to 2 stories in most cases. So on Brooklyn, this one's a little more nuanced. It is the smallest site of all 4, and it was very challenging to get kind of our standard 10 and 15. So in kind of preliminary conversations that we've had to try to grasp what could be achievable here with not exceeding the current envelope of 395, is that we ensure a 10-foot setback on Atlantic Avenue and a 5-foot setback on State. With Atlantic being the one, the facade to the south, kind of fronting the lower scale context to the south, we feel that providing more of a setback here is it's more warranted across Atlantic. On State Street, a 5-foot setback we feel is probably sufficient. I do want to say that we are going to work to further articulate the State Street facades in the future. A lot of the cores for the building are envisioned to be along State Street, but there are support program that we feel there could be additional space to carve out on the upper portions of the building. The setbacks would be in kind with what we see along Atlantic, a minimum 60-foot base height, max of 105. One thing I forgetting to mention, the east-west setbacks. So Smith Street, again, is a wide street. In this case, that would be a 10-foot setback. We are not requesting a setback for Borum Place. Is a wide street with a median. We feel that allows some flexibility for future design teams to have that, so we can ensure we have more gracious setbacks on the other 3 facades. Switching over to ground floor uses. This is something that has come up by most of you, and the concern over the retail depth, which I think it was most apparent in Manhattan, which I will speak to in a moment. But it is stated on all sites that the retail depth be no less than 20 feet. And we recommend that matching more in kind what we would typically see as a 30-foot minimum depth. On Manhattan, this has been challenging to achieve specifically for the southern portion of the building, or the right half, the half south of White Street Arcade, which is running here. Here's White Street. Center Street is all on the bottom of the page, and Baxter to the north, the top end of the page. And you can see that south portion of the building is quite small. There's a lot of back of house function that's needed there. The loading docks as well as intake, the sally ports are all happening there. And a lot of the core that's touching down to the ground is happening there. So the applicant team is really challenged with providing anything greater than 20 feet here. It is worth pointing out that on other portions of the project, they are able to get over that 36 or over that 30-foot dimension along the north end of the White Street Arcade. And the depths of the community space that would front Baxter Street is much deeper, I think around 60 feet. So there's this kind of one pinch point. We feel that perhaps providing an exception for Manhattan would work, given that the context of the Chinatown retail environment does have a variety of storefronts. And while these photos really just kind of indicate to us the street width dimension, there are a lot of these that are not that deep. So we do feel that 20 feet in a limited capacity along White Street Arcade could work. Another note on ground floor uses is most of them have a requirement, so a mandatory frontage where 75% of a red line. All sites have this indicated, that community facility and or retail space be required. We noticed that in conversations around the Bronx site, there's discussions at the parole court, which is shown in the plan southeast corner of the building, may be taken out. And in that case, we recommend stretching that activity line, that community facility retail line to Bruckner Boulevard to wrap the corner. The environment under the Bruckner Expressway is a little bit foreboding with pedestrian crossings, but there is a co-working space that's opening up. I believe the name is Bronx Crossing, just on the other corner. So this is an opportunity to provide some life in an environment where there isn't much today. Lastly, on ground floor uses, there's a note that the community facility space within the Queens site has shifted. The previous location, as shown here, was on the eastern end of the building, or excuse me, western end of the building here, and it had around 100 feet of frontage along 122nd Street. This has shifted. A lot of the program has been shifting, as you are aware. The Queens facility now will house both women and men. And I think it's envisioned that they will have two distinct lobby spaces at the ground floor. So it became really hampered to provide a sizable community space within the jail facility itself. So what's happened is it's now shifting over to be the ground floor of the adjacent parking garage, which is a separate facility. And we are working with the applicant team here to further refine this. We have some concerns still about, how this pedestrian passageway that is currently being shown in the illustrative drawings, we're concerned about the quality of that space. So we're hopeful that we can kind of work with them to further pull this to the edge to activate that corner a bit. The other thing with this frontage is it does give you roughly an additional 50 feet of frontage onto 126th Street. So I know there's been some concern about viability in this space, and we hope that the increased frontage will help. Moving on to civic entrances, this is something where, again, we're pushing for on all sites, but it was really most acute here in Brooklyn. These are current snapshots of the facility today, and as you can see, the sidewalks along Bourne Place are very narrow. And the lines for visitors now stretches out into the street. Now, this is something that the applicant team is well aware of and have been creating much more gracious lobbies and entry spaces so that folks aren't waiting out on the street. However, given that this is such a small sidewalk, we felt it was important to actually carve out some space here. So we're recommending a minimum depth of 10 feet and a minimum height of 20 feet. At these entrances. And we hope that will help increase sight lines while improving pedestrian circulation flow along the sidewalk fronting it. So again, Brooklyn is shown, but all sites will have this minimum. Actually, the other sites are showing much larger, more gracious civic entrances. So on Brooklyn, we've recommended that the Sky Bridge that was envisioned to span over State Street to provide more flexibility to connect the jail facility to the courthouses. There currently is an underground passage today underneath State Street, and we felt that was adequate and that we should forego putting a Sky Bridge across the street, which this street view from Google shows. You can see the Williamsburg, the Watchtower. Sorry. One other thing to point out, there's within the applicant letter, the Brooklyn Borough President had asked if State Street could be closed off to be a pedestrian way. The applicant letter states that traffic would be a big concern here, that State Street in parallel with Livingston and Atlantic really help to filter traffic through the neighborhood. And another thing, which it might be difficult to see in this photograph, but there is an entrance to this residential building. There's about 100-space parking garage, accessory parking garage, with, I believe it's a rental car company is also operating out. And this is roughly not quite mid-block, but would make it extremely challenging, in addition to the traffic, to close this off. On the transparency requirement, again, this is something that's definitely been on your radar. The current proposal is for 30% transparency along Atlantic. The underlying is 50%. We are recommending that they adhere to the 50% transparency on Atlantic. Not much else to say there. It is a vibrant retail corridor, and we want to make sure that it has the best possibility to succeed. On White Street, this is the arcade proportions, something that we were looking at when reviewing the application. This is a snapshot of what you'd see today. The current mapped width is 50 foot, which is kind of roughly bumper to bumper of the parking that you see here. But really the key here is that it's really only about 15 feet clear path for pedestrian circulation to connect from Center Street to Baxter, which you're looking towards now.
I'd clarify, the bumper to bumper is rear bumper to rear bumper,
Yes.
so the cars are taking up most of it.
Correct. Thank you. The other thing worth pointing out, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is the connection that's there today, the Skybridge connection, which is going from MDC North through the south through to the courts on the other side of the South Tower. This is a connection that in some form will need to happen in the future. But just to note some of the dimensions here, 15 foot roughly to the underside of the Skybridge, roughly about 30 feet to the top. This is a section through the building. You see the plan diagram there. It's a section looking towards Center Street. You can see that there's two connections that are going to be made. One is existing. I believe this is an addition above. But this connection to the courts, as I mentioned, is key here. The current application states a White Street volume minimum of roughly 29 feet in height and 35 feet in width. We felt that the illustrative drawing was actually getting much more in line with the proportions that we would like to see. And so if you look at a few examples, a couple that we provided here of 1 Center Street and also another one in Battery Park City, North End Way, both of these kind of have a proportion where the width being 1 and the height being 1.5 times. So we feel that that's much more gracious, much more inviting here. And, you know, this seems to work well for both. This one really at 1 Center Street, there's not much activity, but it's definitely much more a connection point with only a few secondary entrances into the building, where in Battery Park City, North End Way is heavily activated with retail and restaurants. So again, we're recommending a minimum height of 55 feet. And going back to that bridge connection, so the applicant team, you know, I think they're thinking that, you know, they can achieve this 55 feet in height, but we'll need to define this bridge zone that would be set back a distance from both Center and Baxter, and then we'll define this actual bridge volume that can take place. So this is to make sure that that connection can happen to the courts at 100 Center Street. One thing I do, in addition, I think that's it, but I want to make sure I mentioned a couple things with the plan on Manhattan per the applicant letter regarding loading berths and also the staff visitor entries. So excuse me while I zoom back to the plan. So there had been some feedback on the Manhattan site to shift the staff parking the entrance from Baxter Street to Center Street. And what the applicant team has found out as a couple things is that it really complicates things. There's a traffic impact. The next street up is Walker Street, and they see a huge backup by providing that curb cut on Center Street. The other thing is that our zoning doesn't allow a curb cut within a wide street. So this is currently going to remain on Baxter Street, and they've committed to trying to further work with through community input on how to, you know, make this more, I guess, less of a problem for the adjacent senior facility. But they're already starting to show it pulled back from the corner, which the senior housing facility is just to the north. The other thing is the applicant is requesting only 2 loading berths as opposed to the required 4. They felt that they could get what they could through scheduled deliveries. They felt that the 2 loading berths were adequate, and thus only provided for 2. With that, I'm through and happy to take any questions.
Commissioner Capelli.
Okay, thank you. We went through this the other day. I have a couple of, I had raised a couple of questions. One was the facility at the top of Central Park that the state is abandoning or is going to give up as surplus. Has there been any contact with the state about using that as a potential woman site?
I don't know. Not that I'm aware of. I don't know if. Yeah.
That site just became available within the last couple of months, and so I don't think there has been a chance yet, but they are, sorry, and as stated in the applicant letter, they have a lot of concerns about the site and the feasibility of putting the women there.
Well, I have a lot of concerns about putting all the women out in Queens, which is not really that accessible to their families from around the city. So I understand the advocate's argument for putting the women together and they being able to perform social services and other things, but I'd like it to be in a place that's reasonably accessible. And you know, I think that serious consideration would be done for that, number one. Number two, as I've stated, I have problems with, I don't have any problems with the geographic locations of Brooklyn and Manhattan and Queens, and I think Queens is probably the easiest. I am concerned that by shrinking the buildings now and assuming a population that is much less than, I don't know how you're going to get to the numbers that you've done that. You're going to make the buildings much less attractive in the interests of trying to appease the community and not have the buildings too tall. And I think that consideration ought to be made into trying to make them be attractive-looking buildings, because they're going to be there for a long time, instead of trying to squeeze them down and keep them as low as possible, and and take all the ability for design flexibility. So, I don't have problem with with height. I've supported it with residential. We're supporting much bigger buildings, residential proximate to these sites. So I really ask for that issue to be really relooked at. And then the third is with the Bronx site. Has there been a complete elimination with good facts as to why it can't be located closer to 161st Street?
Well, so in the applicant letter, they do provide more of an explanation on the other sites that they looked at with respect to the sites next to the Bronx courthouse. It is very challenged. There's, given the size of the facility that's needed, and the lots there are much smaller, and there's actually 4 or 5, they're kind of broken up in bits. Actually, I think we might have a...
Did you look at the site where the Bronx District Attorney is now and the Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation, which is right across from the courthouse?
No, that was not, the applicant team did not look at that site.
Okay, could somebody take a look at that? It just seems to me that you want to have these things reasonably proximate to the courthouses, and ought to explore every public space. These things are going to be there for 100 years, 150 years.
We'll follow up with the applicant about why they didn't look at this site that you recommended. Do you want to say, when you are talking about the trade-off between height and blocky buildings, if it is echoing the conversations that we have been having? I think the Bronx site perhaps shows it most clearly, that the edge near the Bruckner, height is not a concern there because of the condition of being surrounded by the very wide Southern Boulevard and the Bruckner, and by being able to concentrate more height there, it allows the type of articulation and better design. Unfortunately, I think at times in community discussions, the focus is just on the height without the recognition of what a equally dense, somewhat shorter building without articulation, the harmful impacts of that. And so that is why this discussion that Eric has had about the incorporation of setbacks is so important. I'll note that the items that Eric has been discussing here are items that we would recommend to the commission be conditions of the special permit, so it would be baked in as a requirement.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Alan, do you mean where Concourse Plaza is right now?
Where the Bronx Economic, where the DA moved his offices into.
You mean that corner building? It was built about 25 years ago.
It's a fairly modern building.
Yeah.
Okay, was consideration given to that, or consideration given to that building, and and any possible proximate, that's right across the street to both courthouses. It just seems to me that in that section of the Bronx, there are other options. Thank you.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, thank you, and I appreciate that there was some consideration of the concerns around the depth of the retail space. I know we've talked about that. I think it would be helpful to understand the relationship between depth and use. And, the images that I see of Chinatown small-scale retail, it's unclear how deep these spaces in fact are, and if restaurants, for instance, require kitchens and stockrooms and storerooms and bathrooms, are we effectively saying that the space that will be built will not be able to accommodate a certain subset of retail uses? And if so, I think we should just be clear what the trade-offs are.
Yep. Agreed. Yeah, again, I think given what needs to take place, at least with this portion of the building, we agree with your concern that thinking what actually could plausibly go in this kind of long 20-foot depth space, but there is quite a bit of other area within the floor plate on the ground floor that goes beyond that 30 feet. So certainly, I think the applicant team has, as stated in their letter, that they're open and flexible and want to work with us to determine what the appropriate amount is.
I would note, just to clarify, that on the northern portion of the building where the dimension is over 36 feet, that is also retail opportunity there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking in general, I think we should understand what happens to the retail opportunity when we create very narrow spaces there. Because I think if we were to find, for instance, that we think the demand for space of that depth is relatively low, we may not want retail there at all because we don't want a dead zone.
Yep.
And it would be better to give it to the facility, give it back to the facility so that they can use it for something productive.
Yeah.
So I think that's, I know that we're making commitments that we're going to create active ground floor space, but I don't think we do the community service by giving them space that can't be filled. So I think, it's incumbent on us to understand how feasible a 20-foot depth is. I see these images, and as I said, I don't know how deep they are.
Yep.
I know that they're small, but the buildings themselves are 40, 50 feet deep.
Yep.
So I would like to know that.
Okay, we can follow up with that. I do want to just one comment. One thing that we've been in our discussions with the applicant team and their consultants is that they're really trying to hold that this is community facing along White Street Arcade. So while 20 feet is definitely challenged, I think there's some concerns from what they've heard on any program or further frontage from DOC onto that space. So
I understand, but
yeah.
you hear what I'm saying is that a community wants something,
right,
and we commit to giving them something, but the space might not be adequate, and they're not going to get the thing that we've promised.
Yeah.
So I think we should just be very honest and transparent about that.
Great.
In the spirit of transparency, this discussion has referred a lot to the applicant letter. Has that been made publicly available? Can that be posted somewhere so that the applicant's responses to some of the issues that we've heard huge comment about can be reviewed publicly?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. And in particular in that letter, I'd like to return to the Bronx alternate sites. The response about the Yankee Stadium parking lot was just that it's not viable because there's a long-term lease. But I think we know that that parking lot or the parking structure is not being used very heavily at all. So the fact that there's a long-term lease doesn't end the conversation, at least as far as I'm concerned. And I don't think the applicant really addressed the possibility that there might be a negotiated solution there, or its feasibility as a alternate site for the Bronx. Because I will say the toe pound, if one of the key criteria here is proximity to the courts, the toe pound just doesn't do it.
Well, thank you for the feedback. We will follow up with the applicant and get some more information for you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Marin.
I haven't said much during these hearings or during these deliberations, but I will say that I am very concerned about the location of the Bronx site. All throughout these presentations, when the mayor's office came to us and explained how having jails in close proximity to the courthouses was ideal, I always envisioned something being worked out, whether it was the parking lot situation, whether it was across the street, whether it was some of the state property behind the Hall of Justice, and it just doesn't seem like there's a a genuine desire to even explore those. I understand that there have been some explorations. I'm not trying to insult or belittle anyone, but it doesn't seem that there has been, you know, a real push to try and understand where we are. Because as Anna has stated, there is a lease, that is correct. But we also know that that parcel has been sitting fallow since, you know, Yankee Stadium did its reconfiguration and the parks were moved and all these promises were made to that community. And it just sits there. There's no use for it right now. There was other ideas planned for that lot, and none of them have come to fruition. So I do remain concerned that the distance from the courthouse is approximately, what, 2 miles we're looking at, 2.1 miles to the location of the tow site. Additionally, I have to just put it out there. I mean, I've been working in the housing industry for over 26 years now, and that site has, since the demolition of Lincoln Hospital, has been promised to the community as a site for redevelopment for housing. And the tow pound stood there longer than when it was anticipated and was promised to this community. And here we are back again with a community that has a plan, had put a plan together for that site, and we're just back to a jail and with no consideration for what the community wanted, other than, and I'm sorry I have to say this, but sort of a frontage of housing onto Concord Avenue that really, to me, will not make a difference whether the jail is there with the housing or not, quite honestly. So I'm a little bit perturbed and dismayed and of course, having this as one ULURP doesn't allow us to explore the timeframes for the other sites that may lend themselves as applicable sites for a for a jail. So I just want to state that. I want to put that on the record. I want people to understand that that's the way I'm feeling. Again, I've not said much, and I think I have a couple of more things to say, but I'll hold up for the hearing on Wednesday. Oh, no, excuse me. We had the hearing.
We're not doing that again.
We're not doing that. I just realized that. It was lengthy. But I think that, you know, I just want to put it out there. Thank you.
Other comments? Commissioner Burney.
Just going back to the issue of design again, and there's been a lot of discussion about height versus bulk, about setback and so on. And I mean, you yourself mentioned earlier, this is a once-in-a-lifetime project. And I just wonder why we can't take some of the very good suggestions you've made about setback and so on to the next step. The applicant has an extremely competent design firm retained, why they can't take some of those suggestions and actually come back to us with more of a developed design solution that we can really see some of the impacts of some of these changes, particularly now that we have a lower bed count and potentially somewhat less bulky buildings. It would be really just helpful to us, I think, to see how that actually manifests itself in a design proposal.
Excellent suggestion. We, in fact, have, as we've done with other large initiatives, we break the review sessions into different pieces, sort of chipping away at the issues. What we have here, the presentations or the suggestions that the department is putting forward today, are what we would anticipate would be baked into our approvals as conditions of the special permit. So the most inflexible, if you wanted to change them, you would have to come back through another ULURP process. What we will be coming back to on August 12th are recommendations for what the process is going to be going forward, because the department is very constructively engaged with the design team. It's been a positive engagement. I would say they affirmatively have welcomed our suggestions. And so what we will come forward is with what our recommendations are for how the department will be engaged, how the commission will be able to provide input even following the end of the ULURP process. Thank you for flagging that. Commissioner Ramprashad.
Commissioner Burney took my comments. So, but I want to, with regards to the Queens site, I mentioned this the other day, with regards to 126th Street, have they been engaged with DOT and this diagonal parking? Are they keeping that? And I have concerns about the commercial being located there because it's off Queens Boulevard, and I don't know how viable it's going to be there, tucked away, you know, full block from Queens Boulevard. So can you clarify?
I think we'll raise the question to the applicant team on 126th Street. With respect to community facility or retail, I mean, all of them I think have been open as to what the future use would be and how to work with local stakeholders on the best use. Here, certainly a community facility probably makes the better fit as opposed to retail use.
And I got to hold off on, I guess, August 12th because I had a lot of questions with regards to each floor plate design, to have some kind of idea of how these spaces are being designed, because I've always seen the same plan for the Queen site, for example, and I'd like to see what's happening up above for all the floors, even though I know this is the design build, but at least to have some idea, you know. So I guess August 12th, we got to see that.
Okay, so you'd like to see some upper floor schematics?
Whatever they have, because I noticed on one of the slides, you have architectural drawings A240, which I assume there's more drawings to that set if it's possible to get access. What's that?
There's 239.
Yeah, well, I would like to see a couple more pages if possible.
Commissioner Deleuze.
Just looking at what we plan to talk about over today in the next review session, and then looking at the letter, there's a couple things that I wrote down in my notes that don't seem to be covered, and I just want to make sure that we cover them. The borough president, Diaz's representative, talked about a supermajority for 197C UDEP, not UDEP. No, UDEP, yeah, disposition. If we could speak to that at a future review session, I think that would be helpful. There were comments raised about, which I think raised potential legal challenges related to the DEIS, because the comments being that based on design build and what was provided, that the public couldn't comment on certain sections, that there was insufficient information provided. I think if we could hear why the applicant team believes that that's not the case, I think that would be helpful. And then, so much of the hearing was spent talking about programming and how important the programming is for the success for the new borough-based jail system moving forward. Although I asked about the commitment in funding, and the Department of Correction Commissioner spoke to that, I think it would be helpful to get something in writing about the administration's commitment to programming and funding programming at an adequate level, considering space is being planned to have the programming. It's nice to have space, but if you don't actually have the services, that's kind of for naught. And then perhaps I missed it, the feasibility study related to about 30% of the population in therapeutic units and looking at hospital settings. Did I miss a response to that? Okay, so I guess that goes perhaps with square footage in the review session there. But there's such an interrelationship between that 30% of the population that has therapeutic needs and the fact that if they're taken care of in a hospital setting versus in the borough-based jail setting, it really changes the whole program. So I'm hoping that we're going to have that back by August 12th, but if not, then I'd love to know how we're going to make that decision. I think I'll stop there for now. Thanks.
Other questions? Commissioner Levin.
I guess it's another thing to be hoped for, but is it anticipated that there will be an amended application filed before we vote?
That is the intention.
Okay, and what is the timing on that amendment? Might we know what the substance of the amendment is by August 12th?
I think that is the August 12th. That's the discussion that we were intending to have.
Okay.
With the commission.
And then just
I'll also note that there is another review session where after August 12th, where if there are remaining issues, we'll have yet another opportunity. Okay. We certainly planned for this session and the August 12th to cover all the issues that we're aware of. I'd urge you not to hold back for the final one, but we do have that opportunity to tie up any loose ends.
Okay, good. But on the, I mean, I know that there has been significant change now anticipated in the population to be served by these jails, and that presumably will trigger a reduction in the space needed for each of these jails and therefore a change in the application. I think that's something that there is broad public interest in understanding more about. And so the sooner that we can get public information about exactly how the application is being amended, the better.
Yeah, we weren't able to get it for this meeting, but item 1 on August 12th, building heights and square footage, go exactly to that issue.
Okay. And then just, Chair Lago, following along on your commitment that the department and the commission will continue to be involved in the design of these processes as it unfolds. I think it's also important, item 3 there says design, build, process, guidelines, and engagement plan. I think a commitment to a continued public engagement by the various stakeholders as the individual jails get designed is really critical to success of the design build process. We are embarking on the use of design build and approval of a design build project through a ULURP process for the very first time here. And it's a little bit of a daunting process because I think ULURP was really designed to address a case. I mean, the typical ULURP, we see a building has already been designed and we know what the ULURP application is all about here. But here we're being asked to approve special permits and design changes without even knowing, without the design work even having begun. I do understand why design build is appropriate for these facilities, but I think we have to adapt our public processes so that we are sure that there is robust stakeholder input throughout the design and construction process.
Given the significance of this as the first, I think it heightens the stake to get it right, so that we have it as an example of how design build can work rather than poisoning the well. Commissioner De La Hoz.
I also just have here, because this was more a technical comment on the DEIS, the NILP testimony about adding clean running water and proper sewage from the environmental provisions. I'm just making sure that that was noted as part of the FEIS process moving forward.
Okay, other items that we should know about in preparation for revisiting this on August 12th. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, no other business, then this concludes the review session for Monday, July 29th. The time is 3:24 p.m.